Welcome to another episode of E4 Explicit Podcast. I'm Corey, and today we have Dr. Kathleen Puckett, right? Is that how you say her last name? Puckett. All right. Two T's.
Two T's.
Two T's, right. So if you could just let everybody know who you are and kind of what your background is, that would be great.
My name is Kathleen Puckett. I was an FBI agent for 23 years. 4 years before that, I was an Air Force officer in the Office of Special Investigations. And before that, I was a war protester at the University of California at Santa Barbara. Wow. That's awesome. So it was kind of interesting to go into federal service after having a college experience like that.
Right.
In the 70s and during Watergate. So I am actually, most of my career was in Soviet and then Russian foreign counterintelligence. I'm an old Cold Warrior. So, but I'm primarily most known now for the work I did on the UNABOMBER task force from 1994, from the end of 1994 till the arrest and conviction. He was convicted of Theodore Kaczynski in 1998 in Sacramento of the UNABOMBER crimes. He pled guilty to all of them.
Wow.
So we went from 16 years of not knowing who the Unabomber was to 24 months later, he was in custody. 16 years of bombings. Nobody had ever gotten near him.
Right.
And the way we did it was a very new kind of way of operating in the Bureau that a lot of people were actually opposed to at the time.
Really?
Because it wasn't the Bureau way. For example, why was it that the criminal division wasn't in charge of the case? Because what happened was every time the leads ran out on a bombing, crime continues. It's not like you can stop working criminal cases. Other crimes happen. So when you run out of leads in criminal cases, classically, you're moving on to something else because everything's happening.
Right.
That case never stopped. And the problem is that the bomber never stopped, but there was fits and starts with the investigation. So by 1994, they put a guy in charge of the task force, which had been formed after he was gone. Yeah. He bombed from 1978 to 1987, a string of bombings. And the details are not, I am not the person to ask about the bombs themselves.
Right.
I'm the psychology part of it. Basically, he bombed until he was seen placing a bomb in Utah, in Salt Lake City, behind a computer store. And that's where the composite came.
The famous one with the glasses.
With his glasses and the aviators and the gray hooded sweatshirt.
Yep.
Because he was seen by a witness placing a bomb. He never placed another bomb, and he never sent another bomb until 6 years and 4 months later.
Oh my God.
He was the most careful guy anybody had ever seen. He removed every bit of evidence of his own fingerprints from what he did. He planted evidence to mislead investigators. He never did any Unabomber events except besides building bombs in his cabin.
Right. In
Montana. He would travel we learned this much later, on a Trailways bus all the way to the Bay Area or to Salt Lake or to Chicago, where he was from, to first place bombs and then he never sent another bomb after 1987. I mean, he never placed another bomb, excuse me. After that, it was all through the mail. Never left any clues. In his devices, he would strip the batteries, so you couldn't figure out where any of the components came from. They called him the junkyard bomber at first, wow. Really? In the late 70s, early 80s, because it looked like some kid had put this together, and but it was real determined, and it never stopped. So in 1994, my boss was running a counterintelligence squad down in Palo Alto near Stanford, beautiful place. And they ran out of leads again. And they said, all right, we need somebody to take this over. And they picked him. And he was a foreign counterintelligence guy.
Wow.
And all the criminal guys were very, very upset about this.
Right.
But what does an FCI, foreign counterintelligence guy, know about bombings? Well, in foreign counterintelligence, we're used to looking for needles in a haystack. So once we got on it, we just never stopped.
Right.
To deter us that the leads went out, Terry just had us go out again. He had, all right, go out again, talk to those people again, reinvestigate every event. And when you're done with that, reinvestigate an event again. You never know what you're going to hit. And we ended up having some very fast, we had a lot of projects and a lot of investigative avenues going on, but the most amazing thing about the Unabomber case is that it was his own words in the end that led to his identification, and that's exactly how we planned it. At the end, we knew that someone would know him by the writings, and so we dueled with a lot of people in the government who were against us recommending it to Janet Reno, sitting in Janet Reno's office with Louis Freed, the director of the FBI, and Terry and my boss. And Janet Reno asked me, you know, why can we recommend, the news wants a guarantee that he's going to stop bombing if they publish his manifesto. FBI, give it to him. We said, we can't do that because
Right.
but I don't think he can stop. But someone will know him by his words.
Right.
That was enough for her. She put her life and job on the line for that.
Wow.
So did the director. Yeah. So when the guys knocked on the door of the cabin about 6 months later, a lot of things had happened in the meantime, but not a single person on the team who went to the cabin thought Theodore Kaczynski was the Unabomber.
What?
They had no idea. They didn't believe it.
Oh my God. Just because of the fact that, there's no way that the way that you guys found out how to go looking for him or find him.
No, there's no way that somebody living in a cabin with no power,
Right.
no running water, no facilities, 25 years in the woods, a hermit,
Oh my God.
could melt his own metal, could cast his own aluminum, could build bombs the way he did. He was a genius. He was a mathematician.
Right.
And he was a solid genius, very, very warped mind, but a very genius mind as far as if he wanted to work on a problem, he'd work on it for years. And when we got his manifesto,
Yeah.
which he wasn't sent to us, it was sent to the New York Times and the Washington Post. It wasn't sent to us. He never sent anything to the FBI directly. But when we got it, we knew that this was what was going to lead someone who knew him, because it was obvious that he had been thinking and writing about these things for years. Somebody would know him and recognize him through his words. Somebody in his life. We knew that he came from Chicago, so we were working with the public. We knew he came from Chicago, spent some time in Salt Lake City, was in the San Francisco Bay Area. We thought maybe he was in Northern California somewhere. We knew he was isolated. We knew he was alone. We knew that he was a needle in a haystack, but he had communicated these things to someone before. And in 1996, in February, an attorney in Washington named Tony Bisegli was contacted by the brother, David Kaczynski, and his wife, Linda Patrick. Linda had been in Paris on a sabbatical. She was a philosophy professor. And she saw excerpts of the manifesto published in the Paris Herald Tribune, English language version. And she told David, she'd never met Ted Kaczynski. David hadn't seen him for 10 years. But she'd heard all about him. She'd read his letters. She knew all about him. It was the family tragedy.
Right.
Ted Kaczynski was the family tragedy. And she told David, I'm worried. This sounds like your brother. He said, there's no way Ted would do anything like this. She said, promise me when we get home, you'll read the manifesto. He promised her, and then when he read it, he said, Now, I know this worries me, but we should have it checked out. They tried to have it analyzed. They went over it and over it. They would compare it with writings on their own in their house in Schenectady, New York. They were trying to figure this out. And is it possible that it's him? No, it couldn't be him. It's just, there's no way. There was no precedent for him harming anyone or anything. He's a big animal lover, you name it. Back to the earth guy.
Yeah.
So when we met with him, it was after he had sent us, through his attorney, Tony Bisegli, a 23-page essay that turned out to be written originally in 1971 and later transmuted by him in 1995 into the manifesto.
Whoa.
You can actually see, we actually have the original copy where he said, rework this and, for this essay. And that's what he wanted to go down in history, is having that essay be his statement to the world. But he had written it in 1971 to start with.
Oh my God.
He evolved over the years. He got more and more involved in the whole, and his bombs got more and more sophisticated and people started to die.
Right.
So it's a fascinating case. I mean, it's a case in a zillion. And
right.
in the FBI First 100 Years book, it's one of the cases that's figures in that book. But it was not in the FBI thought to be that much of a success because it took us so long to find one man. Right.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, the FBI would want to handle it as soon as possible, obviously. But I mean, when you're dealing with someone, that's another thing I was going to ask you when you mentioned the people in the bureau, like going to the cabin, there's like, oh, there's no way this guy is going to be, but they didn't realize who he was at the time. I don't think no one realized how brilliant he was in his history. He was at Harvard. I mean, he was like you said, mathematician, like genius. So
we already knew that. We knew that. Just about 5 of us in the bureau knew that. I knew that. My boss, Terry, knew that.
Wow.
Partner, Joel, knew that. The SAC, Jim Freeman, knew that. The Louis Free knew that, and so did Janet Reno. But in the bureau, there were only a few people who believed that he was the guy.
Wow.
I got thrown out almost of the Chicago office of the FBI because they were sure they had the guy who was the Unabomber, and there was no way that a hermit in the woods in Montana could be the Unabomber. I mean, I got yelled at by a whole team of people who had been working it for years.
Right.
So it was a very contentious thing.
Definitely. What then the Unabomber, the name, who came up with that? Why is he named the Unabomber?
The first 4 events started in 1978 at a university, University of Illinois Chicago Circle campus. They found a device on the floor on the tarmac of a parking lot that hadn't been mailed but was covered with stamps. And the return addressee was a professor at Northwestern University. So they took it to him and he said, I don't know anything about this. The guard opened it and it blew up, and it was a rudimentary device, but that was the first device. So that was the first university. The second device was also this one was at Northwestern University in a student lounge, somebody who knew the area.
Right.
And then the third one was an aircraft. A bomb had been put into the mail stream, airmail, to go, and an American Airlines flight. It exploded, or it actually, it started a fire. It didn't actually explode, but it conflated enough to where it caused the plane to fill with smoke, and they made an emergency landing. And some people were injured, but no one was killed. But that was the objective, to take that plane down.
Right.
That was in '79. So 2 universities, then there's an airline, and then the 4th bomb was the president of United Airlines in Chicago.
That's to his house, right?
Sent to his house. And nobody knew where he was picking his victims from. Usually you do victimology in a case.
Right.
Bombing cases usually lead you somewhere. This hadn't led anywhere for many, many years.
Wow.
After the first 4 devices, a guy named Chris Renee at the bomb guy at the FBI lab said, you know what? These were thought to be isolated events, but these things are all related. This is the junkyard bomber is a serial bomber.
Right.
And so put Unabomb, university, and then bomb, B-O-M.
Wow.
And it's always misspelled in FBI cases, so you know.
Yeah.
Never, everybody who wasn't in the Unabomb case would spell it with a B on the end, but we don't.
Interesting. I never knew why he was called the Unabomber, but that obviously makes sense.
First day airlines. Yeah.
Right. That is crazy. Yeah. I mean, so as far as like his manifesto and stuff like that, I know that, I don't know if it's, I think it was, I'm pretty sure it's well documented, like his time at Harvard when he would have, like he says, like the MK Ultra and all these things done to him and stuff like that.
He doesn't say that. Everybody says that about him.
Oh.
Yeah, about that at all.
Really?
And he said that that had the effect on it that everybody thought it did.
Wow.
Never said that. Everybody else has made a big deal about Professor Murray and his experiments and then the CIA and everything because they want to understand what happened. He was very dismissive of it. He never, when we got into his cabin, we found 40,000 pages of written material in there. Every bit of it was readable. Some of it was in code, some of it was in other languages, German, Spanish, Latin.
Wow.
So we had to have it all and decoded. There was some code that was.
And he wrote it?
Mathematician. Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
He was a genius mathematician. And he solved a theorem when he was in for his dissertation, apparently, at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, that had been unsolved for years, that mathematicians had been working on for years. This guy was a stone genius.
Wow.
So, but he never said that he was the subject of experimentation or that bothered him at all. Everybody else who looked at it thought that must have been true, but they made a lot of assumptions about him that he didn't. It didn't come to him.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were talking like offline real quick about, like the show. I forget what program it was, but it was the Manhunt, the Unabomber, and I think Joe Edgerton played Fitzgerald. It was like a kind of pretty big actors, and the guy who played Ted Kaczynski, is like in the Avengers, like he's totally famous. It was a good show. It was cinematic. It was great. It was like harrowing. It was like nail biting. But to your point, like they definitely pushed a lot of that stuff, and like other things that I've read and seen have pushed a lot of things that just make the case like even sexier, I think.
Well, I think that they underestimate the audience all the time. I mean, I think that entertainment, it was dumbed down for television because the real story has always been far more fascinating than stories that have been told. Ted Kaczynski, we found when we went in the cabin, all those writings, he wrote an autobiography. He never had a thought he didn't write down. He wrote everything down. Wow. So it was like walking, I never talked to him, but it was like I'd walked through his mind millions of times. Right. It took me 6 months to read everything that came out of the cabin. 6 months. And I went over it, and I had to wait for some of the decoding. I couldn't decode it myself, and the translations and everything else, but I went through everything. I read everything. I took everything and there were many, many types of writings and things in there.
Right.
And I put it all, excerpts from it in chronological order for the prosecution team for the psychiatric part of the defense. And chief prosecutor took that on himself. This guy was a very well thought of guy, United States attorney in Newark, Bob Cleary, who said that's going to be the toughest thing that the case is going to hang on. We got him dead to rights on evidence, but it's going to be a psychiatric defense. That's the only way they can go. So I was involved with working with the forensic psychiatric team. Dr. Bart Dietz, who you might have heard of. He's the one who persuaded a judge that
to not be,
the one who persuaded a jury, that Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't insane.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Oh my God, that's crazy. Wow.
And fascinating guy. And so we had two, and Phil Resnick, who was the other forensic psychiatrist, very prominent guys. I got the chance to work with them as I had just finished my doctoral work, not my dissertation yet, but my curriculum. And here I got to be working with the top flight forensic psychiatrists in the country,
right,
on what made Ted Kaczynski tick.
right. That's
So
amazing.
it was like I was so privileged to be where I was in the U.S. in the Attorney General of the United States, sitting in the middle of her conference room with WPA murals from the 30s on the walls.
Wow.
And sitting talking to Louis Freeh, him asking me my opinion.
Right.
The AG asking my opinion, traveling all over the country talking to people. And I did a study for the counterterrorism division afterwards about lone terrorists like Theodore Kaczynski, Timothy McVeigh,
Right.
Eric Robert Rudolph, and essentially did a study based on, I had just finished my doctoral dissertation, so I was kind of into the research mode.
Right.
And Terry, who was the deputy assistant director for the new counterterrorism division, asked me to do a study about how are we going to see these guys coming?
Right. Like predicting it.
How do you predicting human behavior is very, very tricky.
Right.
Very difficult to do. And threat assessment is a very, very difficult profession. But I got into it because I was up against some of the most incredible criminal minds there are a lot of criminals, but there aren't many people who sustain 25 years of criminal intent and are never discovered and bomb for a period of that long. Or like Eric Robert Rudolph, who disappeared into the woods in Nantahala Forest in North Carolina, who after a year, everybody said he was dead. That guy is not dead.
Wow.
He's laying low in there all by himself for 5 years.
Yeah.
So these are minds that I got to explore in my career and this isn't even talking about the foreign counterintelligence cases that I worked, which most of them are not, public access, but
right.
I had the opportunity in the behavioral analysis program, the National Security Division, to work on all the big spy cases in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
like the fact that it reminds me, I don't know if you've seen the show, the one about serial killers that's on, Mindhunter. Yeah. So it reminds me of kind of that, where like you're up against something that, no one in, none of your colleagues like believe that you guys, your mindset is the right way to go. It's something new that no one's ever seen before. And like, you're basically having to create ways to find this person in like real time.
It was so fascinating. I was so privileged to be there at the right time to do this.
Right.
I was one of the first 100 women in the FBI.
Yeah.
So
I was going to ask you about that.
And so I came in 1978. There were only, about 100 of us at the time.
Whoa.
And there have never been that many. I think maybe at the most 1,500, maybe 2,000. I don't think that many. I got a chance to get in on the ground floor of a lot of things because they just didn't have that many.
Right.
Now they had women agents that they could use undercover, and I was undercover against the KGB at one point.
Whoa.
Which was cool.
That's pretty cool.
And it was I had so many opportunities I had Air Force experience. I had counterintelligence experience from that work in Seattle, at the submarine bases and the Boeing and all the aircrafts, all the military contractors and everything up in the Pacific Northwest. And then of course, San Francisco with Silicon Valley and everything else. So I was able to have the experiences of a lifetime compressed into a career. Like the last 10 years of my career in the FBI was when this all happened. Because I went in 78. I went to language school to learn Russian in 84.
Oh my God.
In 88, I started studying psychology. I finished my curriculum in 94 and went right into the UNABOMBER case.
Whoa.
So my timing is everything.
Right.
Anybody will tell you that in any profession.
Right.
Because, it's just, I was just at the right place, and I was very lucky.
Right.
And I was so happy to have a mentor in my boss, Terry Turchi, who is still like a brother to me.
Right.
We differ politically, but we'll always be close because he recognized in me. I wasn't that great an agent my first 10 years.
Right.
It was because of him and my partner Joel Moss, who developed developed the level of effort that I was pretty lazy before that. I was kind of a reputation as a lazy agent.
Really?
For the first 10 years, yeah. And they were right. I mean, I was easily distracted. I wasn't that interested in some of the good cases that I had an opportunity to do. I was just distracted by the social environment. It's a heady atmosphere. You're around these guys all the time. There's beer call every night. There's everything. It's a very intense atmosphere. It's very competitive, but I didn't have a great rep.
Just going through the motions.
I was for a few years. And then once Terry lit a fire under me, and so did Joel, and I started working this, and I got the appetite for, oh my God, this is so much more interesting than just marking time.
Right.
And I finally learned how to do interviews, which is one of the reasons why I started studying psych.
Right.
Because before that, I would be more conscious of giving them an impression of myself. If I'm sitting across someone in a room, during the early years, I was more concerned about how I was coming across than what they had to say.
Yeah.
So I was so self-involved and so new and so crass about it. And I taught students quite a bit after this. And I said, the main thing is that you have to get out of your own way. You have to totally forget about yourself and concentrate totally on the other person in front of you. And once you do that, you will never be in the same position again of not knowing what you're doing.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Into it.
Yeah.
I say that about anything.
I was gonna say I can relate to that. I think a lot of
people every day who do all kinds of different things.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, that's so true. Do you, you said you were one of the first 100 women in the FBI. Can you just kind of explain to me? Because I think that alone is fascinating. But just like what you were saying, it's kind of like, I would assume it's a man's world, especially in the FBI, and all that stuff that's going on.
What one of my classmates said to me in new agents class at Quantico, which was, it's tough, it's a tough ordeal.
Right.
I, very unathletic person, actually went over with some assistance the Marine obstacle course. When I was at Quantico.
Right, because the Marines are down there too.
Yeah. Well, the Marines and the Bureau have a long relationship.
Right.
So there is a very macho aspect to the Bureau, and there's a very elite aspect to the Bureau. And I knew, because I had worked with the FBI before, I was in the Air Force, worked a lot of joint cases, and I was recruited by both the FBI and the CIA. And I decided to go with the Bureau because I would have the rule of law to have as an anchor, whereas you don't have that with the agency. You're operating out overseas in no man's land.
Really?
So I knew I wasn't mature enough, or I didn't trust myself enough to keep my land legs while I was in that. So I went into the Bureau, and why did I start talking about this now?
As a woman in the FBI and like all that stuff.
Yes. Okay. So in the Bureau, and what happened was I became totally, sort of was in the Air Force too. I had a ball. I'm tall, I was big, I was physically strong, although I wasn't that coordinated and athletic, but I could hold my own. And I'd been in the Air Force, so I could hold my own with the guys.
Definitely.
And I didn't cower. So I could pretty much give as good as I got.
Right.
So they learned that, okay, not only can she, swig a beer with us, she can keep up with us.
Right.
And I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed them so much. I mean, their camaraderie and everything was just so much fun. So I got real distracted by the social life in the FBI.
That's crazy.
That happens a lot to people who are new. You get overwhelmed with the social aspects rather than the work.
Right.
That's kind of how I was hurting myself in the first 10 years. And so, but once I fell in love with psychology and where it could take me, and that I could help other agents figure out what was going on in their cases. Because they would say, I don't know what to do with this guy. I don't understand him at all about the subject of the case.
Mm-hmm.
Like say an espionage case. This guy I don't understand him at all. I can't relate. This is what he does. This is what he says. And we start looking at him and we just paint a whole picture of him. Tell me everything about him, And after a while, I'd say, this is, I think, what's really concerning this guy. And you pinpoint what that guy is concerned with, then you have a way in.
Right. Yeah. Is that profiling in a way?
It's not. I was never a profiler, and in fact, I got a lot of heat for that because I wasn't a qualified profiler like a Mindhunter.
Right.
That Mindhunter is based on a book by John Douglas, who was one of the original profilers from the 70s.
Yep.
But I thought they did a really good job with it in the first season. I'm looking forward to the second season of it. I think
it's out.
Third. Is it out already?
The second season's out. Third season is in the work.
That's right. I did watch the first two.
That's a fantastic show.
And I like the way they've done that show. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, the Kemper, this stuff.
Oh my God.
I remember the Kemper case.
I mean,
when I was in California, I was a student.
Wow. That's crazy.
And
The serial killers look just like actors look. I mean, I don't know if you, what's that?
Especially Kemper.
Oh my God. He's like spitting image. It's like they brought him. I couldn't believe it.
It was eerie. Yeah. It was
super eerie.
So, I admired that show. And so, but I wasn't doing criminal work. So if you're not doing criminal work, you don't go into the profiling unit because that's all work.
Interesting.
So they didn't do counterterrorism, really. They didn't do, that's why counterterrorism was essentially under the National Security Division, which was where I was with foreign counterintelligence.
Right.
Then in 1999, right before I retired 2 years later, in 1999, they stood up a new division for the first time in the FBI in many, many decades. The Counterterrorism Division. Only in 1999 they started that, and Terry was made one of the top executives, Terry Church, in that. So he's the one who asked me to do the study. That's why I was able to do that and travel all around and got home with terrorists and what was the psychology behind what was motivating them and how to spot them. His main concern was, I don't really care about them. What I want to do is, can we find a way to see what they're doing before they act? Because they're coming out of the woodwork.
Right.
Because they're not working with it. They're not in a group.
They're solo.
Groups are easier to follow because groups, people who socialize in a group are visible.
Right.
They're visible. So, so that's when I was able to help. Theodore Kaczynski, I don't know if you know, Theodore Kaczynski was UNABOMBER suspect 2,416.
Oh my God.
That means that there were 2,415 suspects before them. And some of them were really good suspects.
Whoa. Oh my God. So that's like you guys going through like all these leads, over the years and like tracking every single person.
Say, look, I got this guy. I think he's good for it because this is what he's gonna, when he'd get really excited about it.
Right.
And I'd say, okay, let's look at this timeline. Let's look at this. Here's why I think. And I had a team of people come to me because we were also working with the ATF.
Yeah.
Team of ATF agents came with the AUSA, Assistant United States Attorney, who were convinced they had the Unabomber identified.
Really?
Chemist. It's a government chemist. And they were convinced. And they gave me all this information that they were absolutely convinced would convince me that this guy was a Unabomber. And I listened to everything they said, and then I said, here's why I disagree with you.
Wow.
You know, nothing about he didn't have anything to prove. He was doing well in his career. He had no resentments. He was well thought of. He was well traveled. You know, what was he wanting that he wasn't getting? I mean, all of these people are trying to fill a hole or holes in themselves somewhere. Right. And he was pretty fulfilled. Right. So happy people are generally not criminals, right. Especially the kind of predatory criminals like the Unabomber, like Rudolph, like Timothy McVeigh.
Right.
They're all motivated by very similar things. I don't know how much you know about brain psychology, but basically...
Zero.
Okay, so basically what very, very simply said, you know, connections are everything. You remember that old TV series Connections, when in that English guy who said, you know, this led to this, and then this experiment happened here and all that. It was this, you know, like, and then who knew, you know, the penny was invented, and then,
right.
You know, so, I mean, there was all this stuff that was connections, it's called. We are wired to make connections between things, between behavior, between events, between objects, because it's how we evolve to make sense of our world. We can't control, but we can understand. So connections are important.
Right.
You know, this is connected to this, therefore I get this. This is connected to this. The problem is that these lone terrorists that I studied, like Kaczynski, like Timothy McVeigh, were not the steely-eyed killers on their own that people thought. They thought of themselves as incomplete because they didn't have an ability to socially connect successfully with other people. Even though they wanted to, because human beings are drawn to do that. We are driven to connect. Biologically, we're driven to connect. Psychologically too, but biologically we are, because we don't have fangs and claws. We can't exist on our own out there.
Right, makes sense.
Technology, which is interesting because technology, of course, is Ted's big bugaboo. Like, you know, it's ruining the human race, but it's what did him in. You know,
right.
His war against technology. So the connections that people make between each other, you might think it's a very ordinary, common human experience. But for some people who are not constituted to be able to make those social connections, they're still driven to go for that, but they're never going to be able to establish that. Ted Kaczynski wrote about this all the time, about how he wanted to stop what he was doing, get married and have kids, re-enter society. He couldn't understand why he couldn't get a woman, a squaw to live with him, and he actually advertised in the Berkeley paper for a squaw to come and live with him in the woods. He had no history of any successful relationship with a woman at all. They were like aliens to him.
Wow.
So, but it's a need that he kept trying to say, you know, if I can't be connected to human society in an important way, then I will make the biggest splash I can make. I will connect instead to something that's larger than me, ideology,
right.
Anti-technology. You know, Eric Rudolph was anti-abortion, a cause that put them, that you fight for, you become the avenging angel and the true believer of that cause. Right. And that gives you purpose in the world when you can't successfully connect to anyone else. So you don't have to be a group. You'll notice that all of these guys say they're a group.
Right.
They all say we, they all, because there's power in social groups.
Wow, that's
They don't
crazy.
have it. Yeah.
I never even noticed that. That's amazing. That's like, oh my God. All right. So the you never met the Unabomber and Ted Kaczynski,
I
but
saw him in court. I saw him in
on
court.
court. Yeah. Really?
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Well, but you interviewed his brother,
Many
right?
times.
So is it
Traveled with his brother, interviewed him.
really? Yeah. So
And his wife.
like the real story of kind of like you said, like how he was basically caught by his brother, realizing this is his writings from his manifesto and stuff like that. Was it the word Christmas, or is that
What?
was it the word Christmas, the way he spells Christmas?
No. There were several things that he spelled. He had several British spellings in his analyze. We spell it with a Z in States. They spell it with an S. Different little spellings and things of words, and different. One thing that he had was the saying, "You can't eat your cake and have it too."
That's right.
And that is a very British way to say it, rather than have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
It's the way we usually say it.
Wow.
So,
that's right.
yeah, so there were things like that, and there were little clues that he could recognize. He was a mathematician, so he knew about degrees of freedom in math, and he used that term in his writing, and his brother recognized, and so did we, when we saw the paper that he sent to us, the essay. This is in one of the letters that he sent. This is in one of the, what he makes a reference to all kinds of different books. The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, an obscure work, but it's from the 70s, and we could place his education much better once we had all the documents, we had everything.
Right.
Because he never saw us coming. He never thought we'd find him in Montana. Never.
Wow. You can kind of tell by him just kind of like, I feel like it was like such an underwhelming apprehension.
Well, no, it could have been, we were convinced, I was convinced, in a lot of other words, that cabin was booby-trapped. He was so paranoid that, it was going to go up in flames. Since he never did see us coming, he didn't prepare for that. He prepared for going and burying things and burning things that were incriminating to him, but he never did them because he never saw anybody get near him.
Wow.
And we didn't have that long to look at him before we had to move, because CBS News, Dan Rather called Louis Freeh and said, "We know who the Unabomber is, and you're going to make an arrest." And Louis Freeh said, "You've got to give us some time. We need some agents." That's very interesting, but and he's in Montana, and it was like, okay, you got to work with us here. We need at least 24 hours, and we jammed agents up there.
Right.
Ready, and went in and got the search warrant.
Why is that? Why does that happen? Why would the TV be like, listen, like we can
like a scoop?
Right. But that's like, you're risking people's lives at that point.
Well, journalism is an interesting profession, but the deal was, okay, we will hold off unless ABC gets a hold of it. And then,
oh my God, stop. That's shameful. Wow. That's crazy. Well, that's like when you were interviewing his brother, because I can imagine that's his brother, right? Even though he hasn't seen him in over 10 years, like did he feel like he was like doing him in?
He was absolutely devastated at the thought that his brother was the Unabomber.
Damn.
He was literally in tears.
Yeah, I bet.
He's a tall, philosophical guy. He at the time that I met him, he was a social worker working in an inpatient facility for disturbed teenagers.
Wow.
And you can't get harder than that.
Right.
And his wife was a professor of philosophy in Schenectady. And he's a Buddhist. They're both Buddhist.
Oh, wow.
Buddhist ceremony. Peaceful, an absolutely impeccable spirit.
Right.
Who loved his brother, who he knew was very disturbed, but he just couldn't imagine. Every time we met, he would say, "Kathy, I know that we're meeting again because you haven't eliminated my brother as a suspect. And I would say, you're right, we haven't eliminated it, so we have to proceed.
Right.
And I met him in Chicago. I met him in Washington, D.C. in the middle of a blizzard first, and I met him in Texas where he had a cabin, and I met him in Chicago and up in Schenectady. So we spent a lot of time together.
Wow. Damn.
Remarkable person.
Right. Yeah. He was saying off camera that he's like, does he have any idea like why Ted would do something? I mean, obviously his manifesto kind of explains why, but
He believes very strongly that his brother is the court-appointed psychiatrist came up with the diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenic, and he very grieves. He's been in grief for many years about the fact that his brother is mentally ill. Seriously.
Right.
Which actually we didn't see him that way because he was capable of doing so many things.
Right.
Certainly obsessed, but I think of it more as a personality disorder than a
mental illness,
cognitive disorder.
Right.
Or, he knew. I thought, in my estimation, he was capable of knowing right from wrong and reality from unreality.
Right.
Which is kind of a basic tenet of the mental
right
status exam. And the delusions that he was supposed to have had to do with two things essentially. His parents had manipulated him and destroyed his life by having him skip 2 grades and go to Harvard at 16.
Mm-hmm.
And the other was that technology was ruining human life and the human race. It was a tragedy for the human race. A lot of people believe both things and they're not insane.
Right. That's true. Yeah. And
yeah,
a lot of that's like a slippery slope too for you guys too. Cause like you're like a psychiatrist or someone saying he's mentally ill. And then you're like, no, this man is like completely competent and brilliant of, sending these ridiculously made bombs to people, calculated, has been off the grid, can't be found by federal agencies. Like, that's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow for someone. Oh, he's mentally ill. You know what I mean? Like, so I can imagine looking for
the
someone.
saddest thing about it was that I got very close to David and his wife. A lot of people thought that I was too close to them.
Right.
I was easy on David, but it was just agony for David to do what he did with us. And he, when his brother was arrested and when the proceedings started, Janet Reno okayed the death penalty.
Right.
It created a death penalty case, which David thought he had ensured would not happen by, please I just want to save people's lives, but I also want to save my brother's life. Now he was going to go down a path where, he was a government witness for, against his brother. And he absolutely, we didn't speak for years. Actually, not true, because we actually spoke in court when we were right before that. I was very close. I had a good relationship with his attorney. And I asked him, how's David doing? And would you please say hello for me?
Right.
And we ended up having a hug in the middle of the courtroom that luckily most people were out of the courtroom by then.
Right.
Because they would have said, what the hell is this? This is
right.
That's the last thing that the Bureau would have wanted to have happen was an agent hugging this,
Ted Kaczynski's brother.
His brother in court, So luckily that didn't get a lot of play. But but it was tragic because, and then when Kaczynski finally pled guilty, he did plead guilty to avoid being forced into a mental health defense.
Right.
And he could not be categorized as, he would do anything rather than have, be characterized as mentally ill.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the things that the show, the Manhunt, like I think portrayed, right, where he was so against that label.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So he pled guilty to all the charges.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's in Colorado right now, right?
Supermax, Florence, Colorado. Doesn't really come out of his cell like he used to. He used to come out an hour a day, but it's solitary. I mean, it's the same size as his cabin was. 10 by 12.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Which
He's
I
on
mean,
Bombers Row with Eric Rudolph, with Ramsey Youssef. That's where Timothy McVeigh was too. Yeah,
they were all there.
yeah,
Whoa, I did not know that.
yeah. Bombers Row.
Whoa, you said Bombers Row?
Bombers Row.
Holy crap. Yeah, Timothy McVeigh's another one. That that guy, that was, oh my God, with the fertilizer or whatever it was in the U-Haul truck. But like like sometimes when people like talk and they compare like bombers and stuff like that, I don't think there is any or has never been anyone like Kaczynski because what's his name? The one in oh my God, the guy who I just said, what's his name?
In McVeigh.
Yeah, McVeigh. They got caught like right away. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know. I feel like that was like to make a statement. Oh, I don't care anymore. Like whatever. They were so sloppy with it almost when
Right.
Kaczynski,
Kaczynski was the most careful criminal
oh my,
I've ever seen.
crazy, the detail that he went into. And the fact that you're saying he wrote down everything he thought and like would take years to work on like a single problem. That is just like, that blows my mind knowing like, obviously the parts of the case that are so, you know, polarized and publicized, but like those little details are so fascinating to me because like that really shows like what kind of person he really was.
Right, right.
It's amazing. Have you guys had any like headway of like, you know, since the program that you guys started to kind of predict and find people like this?
There have been successes in preventing uh, uh, acts of violence from lone offenders. Um, the things that have been prevented aren't going to be publicized because
Right.
it is too much information out. But yeah, what we've learned about, although I have to say, Kaczynski, as you say, was unique.
Right.
I mean, he was one in a zillion.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So, but no, there are people who want to be more than they are. They're not accepted socially. They think that that's a way that they can matter in life.
Right.
That their lives matter because they're not. They don't matter in the social sense.
Right. Damn. And that's like their, is it like, would you say like something like an outcry or it's just kind of like the way that they just like, you know, it's just how they operate or whatever. You know what I mean? Like
If you can intervene, and if you can intervene in someone who's going down that route, you know, and get them socialized in a different way where they get what they're looking for,
right,
with a purpose, you know,
right,
that they're able to have a purpose in life that makes them feel worthwhile. That's a good step.
right.
These people.
Yeah, because that makes me think like because I'm like also obsessed with, like serial killers and like the way why they do certain things, and I think it's kind of, I don't know if it is, but it seems like similar to where like they all have something almost in common, right? Where like, you know, their terrible relationship with their mother, sexual abuse when they were a kid, physical abuse, they killed animals growing up and stuff like that. Was there anything in his life that like stood out to kind of like explain anything at all? You know what I mean?
His parents should have taken him to the doctor. They thought that Kaczynski, but they were very proud of him. He was such a genius.
Right.
They were extremely proud of him. The working class Chicago family, very proud. Some children of Polish immigrants, and he was the pride of this family.
Right.
And he became their biggest sorrow. But they never thought that they should interfere with his personality and his development, because they thought that they had a genius on their hands, and who were they to,
right,
you know, they dealt with him as they never would have submitted him to treatment, but they should have.
right. That's amazing. Wow. Is there anything else that you would want to kind of talk about, or I mean, we're going like about an hour.
Yeah, we're going. Kind of, we need to kind of wrap this up, but
Yeah.
but yeah, so this is, it's kind of like I've walked down these roads many, many times with many
Sure.
interviews. So, I never, as you can tell, get tired of talking about these things
It's
because
fascinating.
it's so fascinating. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I'm like, when I called you and talked to you and you said the first thing out of your mouth, I had told my girlfriend the night before, I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if like one of these agents I talked to had something to do with like a cool case? And you're like, oh yeah, the Unabomber. And I was like, holy shit. Like my head literally exploded because like I've always been obsessed with this kind of stuff. And it's interesting and it's good to kind of hear like the real story and not the, the stuff we see on TV. So I really appreciate you talking to me about this kind of stuff.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, that's another episode of E4 Explicit Podcast, and we'll see you next time.